This is Bob. Bob is currently lying in bed under his blanket, staring intensely at his glowing smartphone screen. It's pitch black outside, but his face is bathed in a radioactive blue light. Bob tells himself he's just checking one last thing before sleeping, but we all know how this story ends. Bob proudly tells everyone that he is a natural night owl. He genuinely believes his brain chemistry is special, unlocking peak human performance and mysterious creative powers only after the clock strikes midnight. He imagines himself as a nocturnal genius, wearing a crown of productivity, sitting at his desk surrounded by brilliant floating light bulbs of ideas, while the rest of the boring, average world is asleep. But let's look at the reality of what Bob is actually doing at 3 in the morning. He isn't writing a masterpiece or solving world hunger. He is slouched low in a chair, staring blankly at a massive monitor, watching a 3-hour-long video essay about the lore of an obscure cartoon dinosaur. Bob isn't a genetic night owl. He's caught in a trap. His brain isn't naturally awake. It's being held hostage under a massive biological padlock, and his smartphone is the key keeping it locked tight. To understand why Bob does this, we have to look at his daytime life. During the day, Bob feels completely overwhelmed. Teachers are pointing at chalkboards, parents are holding brooms, and everyone is yelling at him or demanding his attention. Bob feels trapped inside a tiny box of constant pressure, watching the clock hands spin wildly around him. He feels like he has absolutely zero control over his own time between the hours of 9 to 5. So Bob uses the night as an escape. At 2 in the morning, the entire world is asleep. Nobody is texting him, nobody wants chores done, and nobody expects anything from him. It feels like he is sitting peacefully on a cloud in a quiet sky, completely relaxed. This is a psychological glitch called revenge bedtime procrastination. Bob is aggressively sacrificing his sleep to get revenge on the lack of freedom he experienced during the day. He punches his alarm clock because he hates what tomorrow represents. But his biological clock doesn't care about his psychological revenge. Bob looks at his wall clock, notices it is suddenly 3:30 in the morning, and panic hits him like a truck. Sweat drops start flying off his head. He forcefully shuts his phone off, closes his eyes, and commands himself to sleep. But nothing happens. He just lies flat on his back in the dark, eyes completely wide open, staring straight up at a blank, silent ceiling. He throws his hands up in absolute frustration. He gets angry at his body, assuming his internal owl brain is just permanently broken and unable to function like a normal human being. But it's not a genetic mutation, Bob. It's just simple math. Bob is about to be completely crushed by a giant, invisible force called sleep debt. Because Bob fell asleep at 4 in the morning, he doesn't drag his body out of bed until 1:30 in the afternoon. The sun is already blazing high in the sky by the time he finally yawns and wakes up. And this brings us to the ultimate feedback loop of doom. Bob thinks he can't sleep at 11 in the evening because he's a night owl. But the reality is he can't sleep because he woke up at 1 in the afternoon. His body simply hasn't been awake long enough to build up the natural tiredness required to sleep. So the next day, Bob wakes up looking like a literal green zombie, stretching his arms out in misery while the angry sun glares through his window. He drags himself to the mirror, looking completely destroyed. He has giant purple circles under his eyes, messy hair, and zero energy. Bob tries to tell himself that he's totally fine because he technically got his 9 hours of sleep. He scratches his head, staring at the number 9, wondering why he feels like he got hit by a bus. It's time to teach Bob about a concept called sleep architecture. Sleep quality isn't just a basic numbers game about the amount of hours you get. It's about aligning those hours with nature's biological blueprint. When Bob sleeps during peak daylight hours, his body is fighting a literal boxing match. His internal biological programming is trying to rest, but the external daylight is punching his brain, telling him to wake up. The sleep he gets is shallow, broken, and useless. This leaves Bob rotting in a messy bedroom, feeling so unmotivated that it feels like mushrooms are growing out of his mattress. He has zero focus, zero discipline, and his dopamine receptors are completely fried. Now, most self-improvement videos will tell Bob to fix this by waking up at 5 in the morning to lift cars in the rain like a hypermuscular gym bro. We are drawing a giant red X over that advice. That is way too extreme for an average Joe, and Bob will quit on day 2. Instead, the instructor is here to show Bob 3 incredibly lazy, high-impact rules on the green chalkboard that will completely reset his internal clock without making him miserable. Step 1 is the caffeine curfew. We are putting a giant red stop sign in front of Bob's energy drinks. Bob likes to grab a cold coffee or a soda at 5 in the afternoon to survive his gaming session or study block. What Bob doesn't realize is that caffeine has a massive half-life. It operates like an hourglass filled with neon liquid that slowly drips down over many hours, remaining in his system far longer than he thinks. Even if Bob feels tired at midnight, that 5 p.m. caffeine is still inside his brain, like a tiny monster holding a pitchfork, physically blocking the door to deep, restorative sleep. The new rule is simple: 0 caffeine after 2 in the afternoon. Step 2 is defeating the blue light laser. When Bob looks at his phone in the dark, the screen is shooting high-intensity light beams directly into his eyes. This light tricks his brain into thinking it is noon, stopping the production of sleep chemicals. To fix this, Bob presses a giant red button in his settings and activates grayscale mode at 10 in the evening. Suddenly, his phone screen becomes a boring, lifeless gray. Without the bright, flashy colors of social media apps, Bob's brain finds doom scrolling incredibly unappealing. Within 10 minutes, he gets bored, yawns, and puts the phone down. Step 3 is the steering wheel reset. Bob needs to realize he cannot control his bedtime directly, but he can control his morning. He needs to steer his focus away from the night and anchor his day in the morning sun. Right now, Bob is living like a caveman, keeping his heavy black curtains closed and staring at his phone in a dark room all morning. This keeps his body in a permanent state of biological twilight. Our ancient ancestors didn't have this problem. They hunted woolly mammoths under a natural sun landscape, and their biological clocks were perfectly synced to the Earth's natural lighting. The absolute moment Bob wakes up, he needs to forcefully throw open his window curtains and let a massive blast of actual, natural sunlight flood into his room. When that morning sunlight hits Bob's eyes, a tiny reflection of the sun enters his pupils, sending a critical signal to his brain. This light exposure sets a literal biological stopwatch timer over his head, counting down exactly 16 hours. This tells his body precisely when to start releasing sleep hormones later that night. Because Bob got real sunlight at 8 in the morning, look at him now at 11 at night. He is sitting on his bed, his eyes are naturally heavy, and a peaceful little melatonin cloud is gently guiding him to a deep, natural sleep. The next day, Bob wakes up looking completely normal. He is walking down the street with an alert posture, a peaceful smile, and actual energy to tackle his goals. He didn't need insane willpower or a gym bro lifestyle. He just needed to understand his baseline biology and kick his bad screen habits into the trash can. All right, if this helped you out, do me a solid and hit like and subscribe. Catch you in the next one.